Thanks, Brian. I think we can hand over to you to just.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Hi, Brian. Yes, we can hear you. Sorry, the mic is flat.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, but you can't see my slides. I've got to try and share the screen, however that goes. I seem to have an issue here. Richard, I just want to check before I start. Are you able to see my slide and to hear me? Oh, frick. I'm not sure what's going on.
Hi, Brian. You can go ahead. We've seen your presentation.
Okay, Richard, I just needed to make sure you could see everything before I started. So I'm just going to give a broad overview of the wildlife economy and where it comes from. And basically, on the planet, we started with what we call the Pleistocene megaherbivore, about 20 or 30 species in any one place. But over the last 10,000 years, essentially, the only place left with wildlife in all its numbers, sorry about that, I can't get rid of that, is Africa. But we have this problem that 8 out of 10 new people on the planet are going to be Africans. So we have a major problem there. The other thing to keep in mind is agriculture. The overall price of agricultural products since the 1990s since 1900 has been declining despite the increase in human population. And in dry islands, what I worry about is and forests is taking these simple systems. I think they're going to collapse. So what that says to me is that the wildlife economy, as we've got in Southern Africa, is potentially a major strategy, an economic strategy. Forget conservation stuff. And the reason that wildlife has an advantage is it's multifunctional. It's got meat, it's got hunting, it's got tourism, it's got products, and it breaks a link between grass and money. So we can make, sorry, there was a recording on this thing and this red dot is a bit irritating. I don't know how to get rid of it. The fact that we do many things in one place gives us an advantage and allows us to produce more money from less impact on the environment. And allows, this is pictures from Zim in the old days, allows farms to recover after cattle farmers have really struggled to make a livelihood and not really been viable. So just to look at the wildlife economy overall, I wanted to just look at it strategically. We basically got about 3 kinds of funding of wildlife. The one is non-consumptive, and that's public conservation, paid for by the governments and philanthropy and so on. And then there's the ecotourism side in the protected areas. That's worth about $1.2 billion, but only 5% of that goes back to landowners, 5%. So actually going to landowners, not that much money. Wildlife products are worth an awful lot, but because of CITES, we can't trade them, and I'll get onto that. So that means we're very reliant on trophy hunting. Whoops, sorry. Which generates about 500 million in the region, of which 200 million goes back to landholders And from what I'm seeing around the region, including South Africa, roughly 60 to 80% of conservation land outside parks is paid for by hunting. And that's consumptive. And then meat is, we had a little discussion about meat just now, that I think is way underdeveloped. And the two new markets that are developing are payment for ecosystem services and biodiversity offsets and that sort of stuff. Very early stages. Whether we'll ever get that is a question, and then philanthropy. So I'm going to run briefly through this to look at the structure of the wildlife economy in the region. So protected areas, and I'm going back to South Luangwa National Park, where I worked. Having seen the US, for example, puts out a brochure every year that there's 297 million tourists to US national parks. They spend $20 million. With all the multipliers, that provides a $42 billion impact, and they create 322,000 jobs. That's a lot. So we try to do this same work and experiment with it in Luangwa and Kruger. So Luangwa, if you haven't been to Luangwa, you should. And with a student of mine who's now a PhD, Alex Chidakel, we looked at how the money that tourists pay flows through the system. Sorry, it's automated and I couldn't get rid of it. And it goes to tourism businesses, and then the money flows around the economy. We did all the sums from that, and this is what we found. Number one, in South Luangwa, the park fees were generating about 3 million, and it was costing about 3 million. That's what everybody thought the park was. But if you look at it more carefully, what you'll see is that South Luangwa National Park is actually generating $38 million, of which 14 million is right around the park here. And then the other, 20 million is around the country. What you'll also see is the park is generating, and the government doesn't even know this, is $6 million of taxes. So, and we did the same thing in Kruger. I think Kruger was 600 million US dollars a year turnover and R1 billion in taxes. So these parks are basically massive. Well, when they're well managed, they're massive economic engines. So when you looked in the communities outside, here's the park gate, the communities closer, the closer they were to the park, the better their income. So they definitely, the parks are acting as engines for economic growth. And what you'll see though is the parks are also bringing business into it. So these are the number of businesses around Luangwa. So when I worked there in the 90s, there was almost nothing. There were like 5 shops, and now there's 200, 300 shops. That's a problem, but it's also an advantage. So what you'll see though is that these parks are creating this economic pyramid, but the governments are completely and utterly failing to invest in it. So if you look in South Luangwa, everybody uses this little tiny green part of the park because there's no investment in roads and infrastructure and anti-poaching and so on. And if you put that investment in, you would have a 30% return on investment. So you could grow your economic pyramid. And I'll come back to that now. But the governments don't understand how the economics work. So instead of pumping the money back into keeping this park alive, what they do is they grab that money and it goes to Treasury and headquarters, and the parks collapse. So as a consequence, in Southern Africa, we've got 85 potentially high quality protected areas. And here I've put the ones that function. So we've got the Cape, what's this? I've forgotten that. Kruger, Kalahari. There's about 10 or 11 that are functioning out of 85. So we have a major problem with developing the tourism industry. Linked to that, tourism is not, it creates a lot of money, but it's not all hunky-dory. And this is a bit exaggerated, but everybody that's wanting us hunters and stuff to switch over to tourism, what they don't realize is on a regional basis, tourism only does a little bit conservation in a very few areas. And even in somewhere like Kruger, you'll see all the money is generated in a relatively small place. So yeah, here's the data for Kruger. $600 million in GDP, 22,000 jobs, $1 billion in tax, and about 4 to 5% of the total value of money goes back. But we're also, I think this is under-recognized, we're seeing issues in tourism. So this is data from Pilansberg. What you can see here is the elephants are increasing and the lions are increasing and they're eating all the herbivores. And so in the middle of the night, the herbivores are being restocked in these so-called pristine conservation areas. And we're getting major problems of too many elephants and too many lions, and ecologically, I think tourism is problems. So everyone criticizes hunting, but tourism has its own problems, particularly with elephants, which I'll get back to. So tourism is very important. We probably need to increase tourism tenfold in Southern Africa, but we need to have a bit more integrity with how we do it. The real benefit, hunting, I think you all know a lot more about hunting than me, but hunting has superpowers. And essentially the superpower of hunting is that we only have to hunt a couple of animals to make a lot of money. So it's roughly 2 to 3% offtake will make as much as culling for meat. So this is why I use this to argue with the animal rights people that if you just want subsistence, it's not sustainable. Whereas hunting is highly, highly sustainable and allows wildlife to recover. So the hunting industry in Southern Africa is worth about 471 million. That's a couple of years ago, and over half of it's in South Africa, and it's doing that despite being really badly managed. Not so much in South Africa. You guys you have some issues, but if you go to places like Mozambique, the biggest problem is that the money that's paid for hunting goes back to Maputo and Zambia as well. And so the park agencies are funded through all the revenue from hunting, so the money doesn't go back to hunting areas and so on. And hunting's not well administered. Secondly, I think we are way, way too dependent on rich Americans and Germans. And we need to open up all sorts of new hunting markets, what I call the woke liberal urban people. They're doing that in America. If you read this article in the New York Times, an environmentalist with a gun, during COVID, they got a lot of urban people out hunting, mainly for meat, but also for the experience. And what about our African middle class, upper class? We need to get hunting. But if you look at the countries around the region, if Mozambique has 122 million hectares, that's the same as about the size of the wildlife economy land in South Africa, and they're only earning $7 to $10 million, whereas you guys are earning 250. So these countries like Mozambique, which are interested, have got enormous potential, like the whole of Niassa, the whole of Zambezia, even a lot of southern around Kruger. There's enormous potential. And what I'm seeing, the communities are getting stronger and stronger, but they need the private sector investors like you guys to partner with them to get to build a wildlife economy in these countries. And Mozambique and Botswana and Namibia and Zambia have enormous potential. So hunting's the mainstay of wildlife in the region. The thing that we're really messing up is rhinos. The model that we're using at the moment, I don't have to convince you, is completely failing. So you can see there's Kruger. Kruger's the best managed wildlife population on public land in the world, and it's not working. But it's recovering on private land, mainly funded through hunting, but also trade. And if you do the calculations, rhino trade could be worth more than hunting. Significantly, double hunting, triple hunting. And so we really need to think about getting the rhino money back into the wildlife economy, because it could drive major land use change. Funnily enough, elephants are worth a lot less. They're still worth a lot. Elephants the rate of growth is highest where we do hunting. But back in the day in Zim, for example, we used to do a lot of ivory manufacturing. Patrick Mavros, look who's buying the stuff back in the day. They were buying silver though, although Mavros started carving ivory and then switched to silver. But we have 297,000 elephants growing at 6% a year, and we really need to deal with this problem. And I worked out that in Botswana and Zimbabwe, we could create a $200 million industry with 5,000 jobs, and so on and so on. And so ivory, but maybe the skins are even more, in fact, the skin is much more is more valuable than the ivory, because when you cull, you only get 3 to 5 kgs an elephant, and you get 60 to 100 kgs of skin. And there's a lot of added value in these products. But of course, CITES has taken this value away from us. So CITES is costing us $1 billion a year. The other thing that I think is we've been talking about for 70 years is the production of game meat. And I see glimmers of hope now. But I sometimes wonder why we're not looking at marketing into DRC and Angola and these, like the Copper Belt. And it's good to see Chinese markets and European markets, but they're so complicated. And this is held back basically by 1950s veterinary issues. The next market is these payment for environmental services. And with the big conference in the CBD, and they're all talking about putting 30 billion or whatever into conservation. My fear is it'll all be captured by the NGOs and spent in Europe and America. But there is talk about paying for ecosystem services, what we call environmental social governance credits or biodiversity credits or carbon credits. Now, we know that this is 25 years is not really working, but we need to keep our eye on this, and maybe proactively we need to develop a credit system, and we need to go out and sell it. You know, pay us $10 because we're looking after the environment, we're creating jobs, we're social benefits, and so on. So this is a space that we need to just keep our eye on. So just to summarize, everybody's talking about diversify. Well, we get a lot of pressure to diversify from hunting. What they mean is stop hunting and do something else. To be honest, that's not going to happen. All the other things don't really work. Hunting is the main thing, followed by tourism and product trade. But we have enormous potential in the region. There's two things we need to unlock. So here's the performance generally of wildlife on private land in Namibia, on good private land. That's what the livestock guys are making. And I've just been doing research there, and they're really struggling. Most livestock owners are over 80. And they're doing livestock because they can't change into anything else. The communities which have got good land in Namibia are earning far less, so they have the potential to get up to here. And in other countries like Mozambique and Zambia, they're performing here. So I think we need to, and we know what the constraints are, but what we need to do is get these areas up to at least half of what the private sector is doing. So within us, we need to work with our policymakers to come up with a proper wildlife economy strategy for the region, and to go from $1 to $20. That means we would have a $60 billion wildlife economy. So if we get 30 billion, then I think we will be a big and important industry. The second thing is our overall external strategy. We're all in hunting and tourism and so on. And so we know what these pressures are. And I know some of you have been to CITES, which I call the bazaar. It's been captured by Western special interests. And I think in some ways we need to try and fix CITES and amend it conceptually. I'm not sure if that'll ever happen. But I also think we need to understand our market. So there's the 5 things. We've got tourism, hunting, products, meat, payment for environmental services. At the moment, we are so reliant on the Western markets for tourism and hunting. We have neglected the Eastern markets for products, and we need to open up discussions with them and even trade outside CITES or regardless of CITES. And I'm not saying do it tomorrow. I'm saying we need to develop relations with China, Vietnam, and Japan and start talking to them about trading off the East versus the West, because we could play geopolitics here. And also, as I see some of you are doing, and on the previous presentation, local markets, tourism markets, black middle class, black upper class, hunting, wildlife products, we really need to do this. So we too risk. With our current focus, there's too much risk. So that's just to give you an overview, and what we try to do is to get the real numbers behind these, and then to start working with some of the policymakers in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, Namibia, South Africa's a nightmare. To try and develop a regional strategy to go towards this. So I'm going to stop there. Richard, I forgot to time myself. And I hope I didn't run over.
No, it's all good,
And I
Brian.
can send you the presentation.
Yeah, please, if you could send it, and from our side, yeah, thank you.